Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. In today's video, we're going to be talking about Get On My Level X, which was the biggest tournament that took place this weekend, coming in at an S+ here, and you had a ton of NA's talent showing up, and it was an absolute banger. Our top 16 finishers are going to be Jake, Shattuck, Matsunabe, and Mars in 13th. DeBuzz, Cosmos, Light, and Monty in 9th. In 7th, you had MKLEO and SISQUI. 5th with Syrup and Big D. 4th was ONIN. 3rd was RIDDLES. 2nd was SONIX. And winning the entire thing was TWEEK. First things first, let's talk about our top 8 seeds that did not get into the top 8, starting off with Meister. Fairly self-explanatory. He didn't show up, so he didn't get top 8. Then you're going to have Shattuck. He ends up picking up wins on Carflow and Candle before falling to Syrup. Gets a win on Beast Paul. He's been really good in that head-to-head recently, but ultimately falls to Light for 13th place. And getting Light in the loser side as a Corrin player is potentially the worst draw in the entire world that you could have. Even though Shattuck does win in their last encounter, it's just a really tricky matchup, and he does end up going down at 13th place, which isn't terrible by any means, but it is going to be his worst placement of the season. It's also the second time this season that he ends up missing a top 8, the only other time being his 9th at LMBM, and Shattuck is definitely still going to be a top 10 player by the end of the year. But for a top 5 spot right now, it's honestly kind of tough. I'll talk about that a little bit more with TWEEK, but he's still sitting at like 6th, maybe 7th place at worst right now. He's been having an amazing season, and this honestly isn't that big of a setback, especially considering how well Syrup has been doing lately, and we'll talk about him when we get into the top 8. But we got to talk about Light first, because he actually has a pretty solid losers run. He ends up getting a win on Sword before losing to Big D, then beats Pharaoh, Burst, John Numbers, and Shattuck before falling to SONIX to get into the top 8. And Big D was definitely a matchup that we saw coming from a while away. It's just a really tricky one for Fox to deal with, and Light doesn't have a secondary, and I honestly wouldn't be surprised if you did see Light picking up a secondary for a character like Ice Climber. It's just something easy like an Aegis or a Cloud, where you have a couple tools in the matchup that are just really strong, and hopefully you could better play the opponent. Incredibly difficult to do versus Big D of all players, but Light is amazing at this game. I do think that he can do it, and Ice Climber Fox is just a very difficult matchup. Takes his first ever game in the matchup, but ultimately falls. And then we'll talk about SONIX beating Light a little bit more when we talk about SONIX, but at the end of the day, he is a world-class player. And 9th place for Light definitely isn't bad. He's in a similar position to Shattuck, where I do think he has a chance to become a top 5 player by the end of the season, and as it stands right now, he's sitting pretty comfortably in that top 10. We didn't have any low-tier runs at this event, though. We did have a couple of mid-tier runs, so that's going to have to do instead. You got John Numbers and Chunky Kong both finishing in 17th place. John Numbers is going to pick up wins on Nerd Cedric and Grease the Almighty, only losing to DeBuzz in the winner's side and Light in the loser's side. Two honestly really bad draws for Wii Fit, especially for John Numbers, considering that him and DeBuzz have played a handful of times before. I believe they have 8 sets overall, and a vast majority of those are going into DeBuzz's favor. And Fox is just such an overwhelming character for Wii Fit that it's really difficult for you to actually get your setups in. You can't get that max utilization out of deep breathing just because Fox is so smothering. The second you actually get access to the deep breathing, you're all of a sudden in Fox disadvantage, and that's definitely never fun for any character, but especially Wii Fit. 17th at the major, that was absolutely insane from him, so big props to John Numbers for the run, but Chunky Kong had a really impressive one as well, picking up wins on Cake, Jackal, and Myaxi, only losing to TWEEK. The guy that won the tournament managed to take a game as well, and he falls to Jake in the loser side. And I'm not honestly super sure how the Steve Donkey Kong matchup is. It's definitely going to be in Steve's favor overall, because you're just going to get absolutely destroyed the second he lays his hands on you. But Chunky Kong manages to take it to game 5. You have some big dish on moves like back air, a couple of your tilt to be able to contest with the blocks and the minecart, and the way that Chunky Kong plays the character, I truly believe that he can make any matchup work. He is just so skilled. His damage output and kill confirms are on point at literally all times. Such an impressive player, and this is just another amazing run under his belt. And we're going to get right into this top 16, starting off with our 13th place finishers. And if there's a run that I left out and you're curious about how they did, just leave a comment down below and I'll be sure to let you know. But starting off, you're going to have Jake finishing in 13th place after winning 7 sets in a row, losing fairly early on to Amaryllis, and he just absolutely popped off, most notably getting wins on Justin Byleth, Yoda Cage, Stefan Cola, and Chunky Kong before losing to Monty. And I would have Onin and Syrup as the best 2 Steves in America right now, but Jake is definitely going to be sitting sitting at that number 3 spot, one of the best the region has to offer. And he hasn't been going to a ton of stuff, but most of his results in 2024, aside from that run at Cert, are going to be honestly pretty solid. I have a lot of faith in this player that if he continues going to events, he could continue seeing amazing results like this. He was one of the best Steves in America when the character first started having amazing results, and it makes sense that he would kind of continue up that legacy. Next up is going to be Matsunabe. He ends up getting wins on Burst and Beast Mode Paul in the winner's side before falling to MKLEO to Game 5. Gets a win on Candle, but then ultimately falls to SISQUI, and that Beast Mode Paul win is so impressive. Even though I do think Falco does really well into Hero, Matsunabe can't read English. He beat Hero without being able to use the menu. That is just such an impressive feat. So massive props to Matsunabe for that one. He's also going to be the highest placing Japanese player at the event by a fairly significant margin. None of the other ones got into that top 25 area. Neo, Kananabe, and Jogabu all falling beforehand. So big props to Matsunabe for that one. And the final 13th place finisher, because we already talked about Shattuck, is going to be Mars. Recently picked up by Luminosity Gaming. So huge props to him for that one. He picks up wins on Amarellis and Cola to get into that winner's side top 32. Ends up losing to Riddles, beats Anathema in a Game 5, but falls to Onin in the loser side. And I do think that Kazuya and Steve are matchups where ZSS is favored, but they are extremely difficult matchups to win, because if you make a single mistake, you are pretty much just going to explode because of how strong those characters' damage outputs are. And hopefully we get to see more of Mars now that he is going to be on that LG team. We haven't seen a ton of him in 2024, and he doesn't have any amazing results like he was getting in 2023 and pretty much every year before that. Now, none of his results are bad, and this is going to be his best run of 2024, and assuming that we're going to see more of him, I think his future is going to be looking pretty good. On to our 9th place finisher, starting off with the Buzz, and he's going to pick up wins on Anarchy, Ouch, and John numbers before falling to Syrup in the winner's side. And this is a player that he has played a bunch before. Prior to this, it was 11-7 into Buzz's favor. So while the Buzz was the favorite going into this matchup, it's not crazy that Syrup was able to pull off the upset. And in the loser side, he ends up falling to Onin, gets double Steve at this event. Sometimes that is just going to happen, especially the way that Onin and Syrup have been playing recently. And I'm curious to see which character DeBuzz ends up going in that Steve matchup. We saw both Rosalina and Min come out, and neither of them ended up working this weekend. I think probably on paper Rosalina is the better choice, and this is the only time you're going to hear me recommend Rosalina over Min, but you have the tools to break the blocks with Luma. You have Downbeat, which is a very strong tool in the matchup. It's definitely still an uphill battle, but I think Rosalina has the tools to deal with it, and I'm curious to see what DeBuzz kind of figures out in that matchup. Cosmos is going to be another 9th place finisher, and he has had a 9th place curse recently. Circus CFL, Diamond Dust Level of Expo, and now Goml. And this is going to be his best event of 2024, picking up wins on Quandale, Lima, and Monty, only losing to TWEEK in the winner's side, who won the event, and SISQUI in the loser side. Cosmos has been playing very, very well recently, and I'm so confident that the second he gets into that first top 8, it is going to be such a snowball for him, even if it isn't at a major event, even if it's just at one of these big regions. I feel like that's just going to be a mental barrier broken for Cosmos, and then we're going to get to see how truly talented this player is, because he is very, very good at this game. I think it's kind of undeniable at this point with how consistent he's been, but we just got to wait for him to get that top 8, and arguably the run of the tournament is going to be coming in from Monty, who ends up picking up wins on Gamer, Apollo Kage, and Onin. Game 5 versus both AK and Onin, by the way, ends up losing to Cosmos, but then he beats WebJP in a Game 5. Shouts to WebJP for 17th, by the way. Jake in a 3-0, and then ends up losing to MKLEO 3-0, which is honestly just a terrible draw to try to get into that top 8. But this is an amazing run from Monty. Meister ends up DQing at this event, so Monty picking up that game launch weight, saying, "Don't worry, Meister, I've got this," and he absolutely had it. In 7th place, you're going to have SISQUI and MKLEO, starting off with SISQUI, who is going to be the only invader at this event that managed to get into the top 8, so big props to him for that one. He's going to pick up wins on Weezer and Lampshade before falling to Big D, beats Ouch, Matsunabe, and Cosmos to get into the top 8, and the Matsunabe and Cosmos wins are especially impressive to me just because those are matchups where I do think that Samus struggles, but SISQUI manages to overcome only to get another difficult matchup in Onin, and he doesn't come out on top this time around. The Steve manages to best him, and Steve Samus is definitely a difficult matchup for Samus, and you have tools in the matchup kind of to deal with moves like minecart. I really like how SISQUI was getting usage out of that up tilt. I think that is going to be the counterplay that is developed versus Steve, that if you have this massive hitbox, you're okay to take the trade with minecart as long as it means that Steve is going to stay in that disadvantage. He is going to lose that iron, and SISQUI was amazing with his up tilt, specifically versus Onin. Just played out of his mind at this event, so massive props to him for the run. You're also going to have MKLEO finishing in 7th, and I was very impressed by Leo's play. He ended up getting wins on Elijahman, Beastly, and Matsunabe before falling to Big D in a Game 5, beats Monty to get into that top 8, and once in the top 8 is the misfortune of playing SONIX. Managed to take it to Game 5, but the games that SONIX won were extremely dominant, definitely in his favor. But I love how Leo was playing this tournament. He was just getting so much utilization out of Rebel's guard, and that is why MKLEO is the best Joker in the rules, because he understands the win condition of the character, which is getting a bunch of Arsens, and he was getting like 3, sometimes even 4, maybe that's a little bit over-exaggerating, but he was getting a whole bunch of Arsens per stock, and it was definitely helping out versus SONIX. I mean, it was helping out in all of his sets, but it was just evidently clear in that one. Really, really happy with how Leo played here. As I already mentioned, this is a great sign for him going into the rest of 2024, and I have a ton of faith that he's going to finish out the season pretty strong. Moving on to our 5th place finishers of Syrup and Big D, starting off with Big D coming into this event with a 257th at Kagaribi being his last result, ends up drowning in the pools of that event, and he just farms, beating Shu, Light, SISQUI, and MKLEO to get top 8 through the winner's side, where then he ends up falling to Riddles and Onin, but manages to take Onin to a Game 5 in Ice Climbers versus Steve, which is a very difficult matchup, and this is just such an impressive run from Big D. I mean, it goes without saying, 5th place at a major is always good, but 5th place at a major with a character like Ice Climbers is just such a feat, and he gets a little bit lucky getting Light in his path, but you still have to beat Light, who is a top 10 player in the world, as well as picking up wins on players like SISQUI and MKLEO, and those definitely aren't free matchups for Ice Climbers by any means. And the Canada events, Big D has just been so good. 9th at Battle BC, now he's got a 5th at Goml. We just need more majors in Canada so we can continue seeing that Ice Climber excellence. And editing for block, I should add that MKLEO went solo Aegis versus Big D, and that is a very difficult matchup for Ice Climbers. Now, I don't think Leo played it amazingly just because he spent so much time on Mithra. That's one of the few matches in this game where Pyrus should be the character you're playing for a majority of the time, just because Side B alone literally destroys Ices as a character, but really difficult matchup to overcome, and Big D once again overcomes it. Just wanted to point that out. In 5th place beside him is going to be Syrup, picking up wins on Seesaw, Shattuck, and DeBuzz, only losing to TWEEK and SONIX, and he was the only player at this event that managed to take TWEEK to Game 5, so massive props to him for that one. And Syrup has been a ticking time bomb of a player for me, because we already knew that he was going to be very good at this game. When he was farming people in 2022 with Ness, now he switches to Steve at his main character. There is going to be a bit of an adjustment period here, and it feels like that adjustment period has finally worn off. 5th place at Cirque, now he's got a 5th place at this event. I would still have Onin as the best Steve player in America, but Syrup is an easy 2nd place right now, definitely a top 5 Steve player in the world, and he has a very bright future ahead of him. In 4th place, you had Onin. 3rd place, Riddle, starting off with Onin, who had probably the best losing run of the entire tournament, winning 7 sets in a row after losing fairly early on to Monty. He picks up wins on Icy Mist, Jackal, Tarek, Mars, and DeBuzz to get into top 8. Once in that top 8, he beats both SISQUI and Big D before falling to SONIX. And SONIX is just like the worst player, honestly, in the entire world to get versus Steve, but just in general, a really tricky opponent to draw. But I believe Onin has Sonic as Steve's worst matchup, and I can see why. It's just very difficult for the character to keep up in the game. You really can't get the maximum utilization out of your resources, because a majority of your time, you're just not going to have the correct resources to actually be able to take Sonic out. And Onin is definitely the best Steve player in America. We're starting to see him return to that form that we all know and love. 3rd at Collision, 2nd at Diamond Dust. Now he's got a 4th place at this event. He's just been on such a hot streak recently, and he definitely has what it takes to be a top 20 player by the end of the season. Very curious to see how that ends up panning out. And speaking of players in the top 20, you're going to have Riddles getting 3rd place at this event, picking up wins on Rembrandt, Stefan, Mars, and SONIX to get into the top 8. Once in the top 8, he ends up beating Big D, takes a game off both TWEEK and SONIX, but ultimately loses those sets. And I thought Riddles was playing out of his mind at this event, specifically in that winner's quarter sets versus SONIX. He just looked so good. The Terry was on point this tournament, and I think that's going to become a more common trend, that when it comes to Riddles getting into the top 8s of these big events, maybe beforehand you're going to see a lot more Kazuya, but once in the top 8s, I think he's going to need to make the utilization out of that Terry, just because players like TWEEK, like SONIX, like Shattuck, just a bunch of top level people in this game are not going to give him those mistakes on Kazuya. He's just not going to be able to get enough opportunities, or at least with Terry, you can kind of put a little bit more initiative into your own hands, force the interactions versus these characters, trying to run them down. It's just so difficult to do on Kazuya. He has a fighting chance on Terry. He looks exceptional on both characters, and I was just honestly very, very impressed by the top 3's play at this event, so huge props to him for the run. And our grand finalists are going to be SONIX in second and TWEEK in first. SONIX picks up wins on Tarek and WebJP before falling to Riddles. Beats Light to get into that top 8, and once in the top 8, he goes pretty crazy, beating MKLEO Game 5, Steer Up, ONIN, and Riddles before losing to TWEEK. And that win over Light is definitely going to be his most impressive win. That feels like a record that we can finally put behind him, even though they've only played 3 times recently. One of those sets goes Light's favor, 2 of them goes SONIX's favor. It's just very clear that he's put so much time into this matchup. It's definitely one that Sonic can overcome. It's not like Fox is unwinnable by any means, because Sonic barely has losing matchups, if he has losing matchups at all, and if he did, they would absolutely be winnable. Sonic's proving that this time around. His aggression and camping is just so good. I've said it so many times before, and something I've also said a lot before is it's another second place for SONIX, the second place curse. It is going strong, but to be fair, out of all the curses that you could have, this is like probably the best one, because I couldn't think of a first place curse that doesn't really sound like a curse to me. So while he isn't winning any of these big events, he is the most consistent player in the entire world, and that's over Akola, by the way, because Akola has a 3rd place at Kagaribi. So SONIX's most consistent player in the world. Unfortunately for him, always the bridesmaid, never the bride, at least in 2024, but it's gonna happen at some point. It is literally just an inevitability, and right now all we can really do is just praise how consistent SONIX has been. But when you gotta praise a player at this event, it has to go to TWEEK, because he was clearly the best player at this event. He gets wins on Mpopo, Anathema, Chunky Kong, and Cosmos to get into the top 8. Once in the top 8, he beats Syrup, Riddles, and SONIX. And that Syrup win especially has got to be feeling good for him, because Steve is a pretty big weakness for TWEEK. I would say it's his biggest weakness as a player. So to take out one of the best Steve players in America in that top 8 has got to be feeling extra good. And he was just playing so good this tournament. Spoilers for an upcoming video, but I am making a video just about how good TWEEK's up smash were, because if you look at every single set that he played, the utilization that he was getting outside of up smash, or out of up smash rather, was literally incredible. TWEEK is the highest variance player in Smash Ultimate that can actually win a major event. And I know that it kind of seems crazy to say looking at his results, because his worst result is the 17th at Collision and everything else is a top 8, but what I mean by that is TWEEK is either going to get like 9th, 5th place, maybe 7th place, or he is just clearly the best player in the room. He's going to win the event. It's not even close. And Goml was one of those examples. It was just very evident that TWEEK was going to take it. And even though he definitely has an unfortunate finish versus SONIX, where SONIX ends up SDing twice in that second game, it feels like every time TWEEK wins the major, it's so anticlimactic. But I'm very confident, even without those SDs, he would have come out on top anyways, because he was just so good this time around. And with that, I thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed this board. It's been absolutely unreal as of late. If there's anything I left out, got wrong, or if you just want to say hi, leave a comment down below. Be sure to sub while you're down there, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye-bye!